Hey guys, how's it going? So, as you know, we have our 90-second knowledge series where we take important questions surrounding health, wellness, or exercise, and we take these answers and we distill them down into 90 seconds or less bits of information. However, some questions come up so frequently, or the mechanisms or the answers behind those questions are so complex that it requires a bit more than 90 seconds. And that's what I want to do today. I want to answer a question that often comes up, but people are often misled about what the mechanism is behind it. And we're going to be talking about cramping. What is cramping? What causes cramping? And what can we do to avoid it? So the old way of thinking, or what a lot of people believe, is that cramping in your muscles due to exercise is caused by a depletion of electrolytes or a lack of electrolytes being put into the body. And this lack of electrolytes somehow causes cramp. And although that has an element of truth to it, it's not the entire story. And that whole way of thinking can be debunked in one simple question, or one simple fact is that when we are running, why do we only cramp in our legs? For example, why do you only cramp in your calves when you're running? And why don't you ever cramp in your biceps or in your pecs? So there's something going on that's more specific in terms of the muscles we're using when it comes to running. So we know that electrolytes are a systemic thing. So if you are depleted in electrolytes, it doesn't mean you're only depleted within your muscles that you're using, so within your legs when you're running. It means it would happen throughout the whole body. So if it were an electrolyte issue, it means we would cramp in our entire body. So something is specific to the muscles being used. And the new way of thinking, or new studies, suggest that there's a neural component to cramping. Another question you need to ask yourself is, why do you only really cramp in a race and not in training? If cramping was purely electrolyte driven, we often go into electrolyte depletion when we're training, but we don't cramp. So there's also an element of intensity or the race prep or the race demands when it comes to cramping. So there's an element of intensity there. So when we talk about this new neural theory, so yes, we have our electrolyte theory, but we also have a neural theory. And this is something I want to explain to you. So within your muscles and your muscle fibers, you have these two little components that kind of direct or dictate length of muscles. And the first one is your muscle spindle fiber. And how that acts is, when a muscle is stretched maybe a bit too far, the muscle spindle fiber acts as a reflex to bring it back into a length-tension relationship. So it almost reflexes into a contraction. And that makes sure your muscles don't overstretch and become damaged. On the other end of the spectrum, you have what's called Golgi tendon organs, where when your muscle produces too much force or contracts too forcefully, these little guys switch on and cause your muscle to relax. And what this does is it protects the muscle from over-contracting and causing damage. So now we have muscle spindle fibers that protect overstretching, and we have these Golgi tendon organs which protect against overcontraction. And these two work in harmony to keep the muscle in a good protective length. Now what happens, what they've found in new studies, is that when you are fatigued, when you are exercising at intensity that is higher than you used to, higher than what you've been training at, when you are exercising in conditions that are very hot, very humid, or when you're doing unfamiliar exercises, so your muscles aren't used to the kind of contractions that you're putting them through, what happens is that the neural pathways from the brain to these Golgi tendon organs, they switch off or they become inhibited. So now all of a sudden, our muscles contract when they're overstretched because of the muscle spindle fibers, those are working perfectly. But when our muscles overcontract, and we're asking them to do that because we're racing, we're really asking a lot from our muscles. When they overcontract, these little cells or little mechanisms that prevent this overcontractions no longer exist or no longer work optimally. So there's nothing to stop it from overcontracting. So it contracts and contracts and contracts. And that's essentially a cramp. So it's not really electrolyte driven, and that can be debunked because of the fact that we only cramp in muscles that we're using, and we tend to only cramp when we're racing or when we're training extremely hard. So it's a neural component. And how we get over this whole neural component, how we treat cramps, is not by taking more salts, taking more electrolytes. It's actually by preparing our bodies a bit better. And we know this. We know the harder you train, the more prepared you are for a race and the less likely you are to cramp. So you need to prepare yourself for training. You need to make sure that the muscles are prepared for the type of contractions, the length of contractions, and the intensity of contractions that you expose them to. But what this also teaches us is that we shouldn't just pump the salts into our body when we start cramping. Maybe what we should do is decrease the intensity a bit. So if you do start cramping, maybe slow down and walk. Or maybe drop your gear a bit and pick up the cadence if you're cycling, just to alleviate that intensity through the muscles. Another way we can alleviate cramping is by stretching. And we know what stretching does is it causes those muscle spindle fibers to react because we stretch the muscle. It activates that. It gives the Golgi tendon organs a bit of a break, and it kind of refreshes the whole symptom or the whole cycle. So slowing down your intensity, giving yourself a bit of a break, and maybe a very easy stretch without causing cramp in the other muscles. We know when you cramp in your hammies and you try to stretch them out, you go into cramp in the calf, on the quad. But stretching does seem to help. So don't pump yourself with electrolytes. Yes, it is part of the story, but it's not the whole story. There's a whole neural component involved to this as well. So I hope what you can take home from this is that cramping isn't just nutrition. It's not just the fact that you're dehydrated. It's not the fact that you're not pumping in these salt products the whole time. It's the fact that you're probably undertrained. You're probably asking your body a bit much at that moment. And you're probably exercising at an intensity that is above your normal or in conditions that you're not quite used to. So keep that in mind when you're preparing for a race. Keep your training specific. Try get into intensities that replicate the race. And don't overload your body with salts and electrolytes and expensive products, because the reality is you'll probably just pee them out. So I hope that helps. I hope that clarifies some of the issues. We look forward to answering some more complex mechanisms or more complex questions going forward in these series. And it's an exciting time to just figure out what's going on with these things.